I may be a doughy 31-year-old boomer, but I was 8 when the Pokemon craze was happening. So for me, Pokemon Snap on the N64 has a lot of sentimentality and memories associated with it. So when I got to experience my Pokemon fighting on the big screen or take pictures of them in a Safari game, you bet your ass I was excited. Normally a game of this genre wouldn't seem like a good idea for a big budget investment, but you have to keep in mind that this was the 90s, and Pokemon's viral nature made Beanie Babies look pathetic. If there was a Pokemon game, I had to have it. The Game Boy games, the pinball spin-offs, Pokemon Puzzle League, and so on. But Pokemon Snap was probably my favorite for many reasons. By the way, for the 5 people who are going to comment, it's pronounced Pokemon, not Pokemon. I know, I'm not obnoxious. Originally, Pokemon Snap was going to be a game about photography, using the working title Jack and Beanstalk, produced by the fittingly named group Jack and Bean, but they had no idea how to make that into a game. Once they added Pokemon into the mix, it became clear that it would just be an observation photography safari game, originally being produced for the Japan-exclusive Nintendo 64 DD before moving on to the N64 due to extensive delays. Only one extremely low-resolution clip exists, showing proof of concept gameplay with Ekans being the only Pokemon that was cut from the final game. But some noteworthy changes include the courses originally having a very clear-cut path, while the final game was a bit more natural-looking in its pathing, and a much wider viewfinder while aiming at targets. It would have been cool to see this Sahara level at some point in the main game, but for reasons unknown, they removed it. Probably because it served as a beta sample before they decided it was replaced by the first course. It's also funny to see how they removed the rock and replaced it with a pester ball. Like, they obviously got the rock idea from Pokemon Safari in Red and Blue, but realized it carried a more brutal connotation when used in 3D, and opted to go with a colorful explosion from pester balls instead. But as it turns out, Shigeru Miyamoto and Satoru Iwata both worked on the game as producers, and it really jerks my tears every time I research a game that I love and find out, oh yeah, by the way, Iwata gave back massages and bonus checks to everyone who worked on this game. And I'm just sitting here like, I remember being a stupid little white third-grade little bitch and being blown away when I saw Pokemon Red and Blue being advertised for the Game Boy, and I'd see how cute Pikachu looked and how well animated the commercial was, and I immediately felt a violent compulsion to catch them all. The anime would air with 9 episodes spread out over 20 days from September 8th to the 28th, which then tied into the mainline game's release quite brilliantly, so it makes sense that the Pokemon Company would include a young photographer character named Todd Snap in the official anime as a tie-in for his premiere in Pokemon Snap. So an excited little boy was I, as I took my cartridge home from the game store and popped it in, only to be met with the most perfect introduction to a game ever, with a song that sounds like the player is meant to be in awe of this blocky 3D world. We see Todd searching in a nearby area as something catches his attention, and he snaps 6 failed photos before the Pokemon escapes, which was much more impactful back then, as Mew had just been officially acknowledged by Game Freak with the introduction of the first movie. Realizing he missed his insanely rare opportunity, Todd appears visibly discouraged at his slow photography. The game then segues back into the title screen, which is jarringly loud and energetic compared to the somber piece prior, to establish that this game is just going to be a fast-paced barrel of fun. Upon creating a new save file, we can see our determined-looking protagonist acting as a Pokemon photographer identification card, with a cute little transparent Pokeball marquee in the background. Oh, also, quick interlude, but I'm gonna talk about most of this game's quote-unquote secrets, if you can say that about a 1998 game in 2021. So if you haven't played this, just go emulate it or something. I'm sure you can even find an aftermarket cart on the market for really cheap. Like, it's janky and old, but it still has a ton of charm and fun music. So if that's something you want to experience purely, which I do recommend, then come back after you've beaten it. It's only a few hours long if you know where to go, and the soundtrack still holds up really well, but yeah, anyway, let's go. As you finish creating your save file, you meet Professor Oak from the anime, who begins his conversation with a jarringly clear audio recording, which you'll hear from time to time throughout the game despite audio recordings taking up a good chunk of space on the N64's then limiting 64 megabits per game cartridge. He gives you a general introduction in which he explains how he invited you there to take pictures of wild Pokemon on Pokemon Island using the futuristic 01 vehicle before he whisks you away to the first level, simply called Beach. The game initially takes things slowly, to the extent that you can't actually progress until you've proven that you're able to figure out the shutter function on your camera, using the Z trigger to prime with the A button to snap a photo. But the moment you snap your third Pidgey photo, the game officially opens up and stops handholding. You can also use the C buttons on the N64 controller to rotate 90 degrees should you need to turn around quickly. And later in the game, you'll unlock 4 more items that add replayability to the game, which I'll explain in a moment. But my point is that the game is competent in its controls, if not a little bit antiquated. But for now, we continue the beach level as your limited tool selection means and you can mainly just observe and snap photos without getting physically involved. At the end of the course, as you approach the gate, you'll hear 3 loud siren sounds indicating the 3-second countdown until you teleport back to the lab, at which point you'll select the best photo taken, optionally choosing to save any photos to your personal album to add captions later, should you so choose. The music that plays during the photo selection process is the audio equivalent of a deep breath, as you decompress from the frenetic action of trying to land centered shots on fast-moving or distant monsters. The game transitions to Professor Oak's lab, where he'll assess the quality of each picture while the music Professor Oak's Check begins playing. It's a jazzy, percussion-heavy song that accentuates the tension of hoping Professor Oak will give you a good score for your performance, augmented by the dramatic impact sound effects, which gradually rise in pitch with every successive good mark you receive, with the result being, in my opinion, an incredibly satisfying arcadey bookend to each course. Once you take pictures of all available Pokemon in the level, the professor will say that thrilling phrase paired with a voice line to let you know you're about to progress. Wait! With a little bit of fanfare, you'll be introduced to the apple, which allows you to bonk Pokemon on the head and lead them to other areas, or optionally move objects out of your way depending on certain circumstances. Later comes the Pester Ball, which can disturb hidden Pokemon that were previously inaccessible and generally serves as the overall provoke item. Then came the Pokeflute, which awakens sleeping Pokemon like Snorlax or Vileplume, and also encourages Pikachu to have a pretty good time overall. And finally, the Dash Engine, which allows you to move at triple speed through the track to aggressively pounce on the ideal timing for a photo. Before I go over the courses, I'd like to clarify for new viewers that I'm really big on discussing the way the music impacts a game or my memories of it, and I just think it's fun to dissect what I think the instruments are and what sort of image they present. So if you think that's boring, then just bear with me, it won't take that long. The original game's opening was already discussed in terms of how it hypes the player up for an adventure into the unknown, but once we get into Professor Oak's lab, we hear the opening synthetic notes of a very warm yet lighthearted song that sporadically bounces up and down the bar in a consistent melody that loops for the rest of the song, followed by a bouncy sounding bass line and some bongos for percussion, before a flute is eventually added, which loops the song back to the beginning. The course select theme clearly expands on the melodic template established in Oak's lab, with a 4-note arpeggio as well as some castanets and what sounds like a plucked cello for the lead melody, revving up the player before they jump into the new course. The areas are very well-rounded, with great music to boot. Beach has a goofy reggae theme with an emphasis on water and normal Pokemon. It's a fast-tempo song with a low-pitch bass guitar and a lead electric guitar, as it does that surf rock sound we're all too familiar with, before eventually transitioning into the next, equally carefree section, with some wind instruments to convey a sense of ease and lack of judgment, as should all good tutorial levels. The tunnel theme is an ominous, minimalistic song with no percussion and a few isolated synth melodies playing atop a lonely wind instrument melody layered over a lower-pitched synth serving as the bass. All of which is completely turned on its head once you figure out how to reactivate the power plant by tossing an apple at a nearby Electabuzz, and for about 30 seconds, since it's the end of the level, we hear the addition of bells and percussion, with some steam sounds in the left audio channel, to remind us that this abandoned factory used to be a bustling beacon of industry for whatever it did. Next is Volcano, which decidedly uses a volcanic fire-level sounding song, but I love how restrained it is. It's purely percussion with some bass guitar, bongos, flute, and xylophone. Despite being very simplistic, it carries the tumultuous and high-risk atmosphere one would very easily find aside an active volcano, and is surprisingly one of my favorite tracks once I really sit down and listen to it. River is a similarly minimalistic tribal song featuring a very difficult to ignore metallic rattle that I don't know the name of, as well as some aggressively rapid bongos, bird chirps, wind sections, and melodic xylophone notes that lead the viewer down the casual lazy river teeming with innocuous aquatic and vegetative life. wave begins on an immediate descending arpeggio, which is fitting since the player descends here from the river, harmonizing with a contrasted harp melody that scales up as the arpeggio scales down and vice versa, with a B section that sounds more perilous thanks to what I believe is a shift to minor key. This one has a lot of poison types with some normal and ice types as well, but beyond that, it's fairly unremarkable. Valley is a big open mountainous area with a viciously flowing stream, as well as lots of ground Pokemon and a good variety of others, like Dragon, Fighting, Rock, and Water. It's definitely the most ambitious looking area in the game, with plenty of tricky shots to pull off, and hidden mechanics that aren't incredibly obvious, like needing to bait the Mankey to throat punch the previously river-bound Magikarp, which later in the course turns into a Gyarados. It also has a get up and go energy to it, starting off with some tribal drums and a whistle of sorts, a plucked cello used as the running bass line, some highly syncopated jazz piano notes, and plenty of brass sections throughout the song. It sounds like a Native American jig for the first half, and a high-rolling casino theme for the conclusion before the song repeats, and it adds a lot of thrill to the course. Pokemon Album is the song that plays when you look through your saved album of photos, and while this music plays, you can't help but look back fondly on the many well-timed shots you have on display thanks to the basic percussion, simple music box melody, and flute harmony. Out of Film plays when you're, just a quirky little musical phrase that ends with some lingering percussion. Once all of this is done, you talk to Professor Oak, who tells you about the mysterious signs, which are Pokemon-shaped illusions found around the previous tracks, which is absolutely just padding out the game. But as a kid, I remembered this being before an actual guide or the internet was available to bail me out, only hearing rumors from the other kids in my grade to figure out how to progress. Finding out you have to throw a Pester Ball into the lava at the start of the Volcano level to get a coughing-shaped smoke cloud, realizing the Kingler rocks were directly behind you at the start of the beach course, and somehow not immediately registering that Dugtrio Mountain was directly in front of you at the beginning of the level despite being a bit unclear in the distance, were all little details that struck me as very clever. If you ever get stuck figuring out how to progress, you can always just look up all the Pokemon in the game and figure out how to get them. One of the last ones to stump me as an adult was in the cave level, where I remembered seeing Muck as a kid, but all I could find was Grimer. As it turns out, you needed to take pictures of the two Grimer at the start of the level before a Muck will appear in the next section. Similarly with Dugtrio, you don't lure it out with an apple like I originally thought on my first playthrough. You just take gradual pictures of Diglett until it shows up in its evolved form with a myriad of additional Dugtrio for huge points, which was a little bit confusing to learn until you realize that the other Pokemon like Lapras function in the same way. As long as you take pictures of everything in sight, however, you'll figure out the pattern eventually. For the final level, you end up essentially going to space, where you finally encounter Mew, who simply evades and obstructs your photos unless you can hit him repeatedly with Pester Balls, at which point he'll appear from behind you on either your left or right side, and if you time it right, you can get a high-value picture. The entire time, you'll see constellations of the other Pokemon signs in the sky, and despite this clearly being a straight line with a dark and obscured skybox, it undeniably gave young children the impression of being in literal space. The music is just a reincorporated version of the mysterious sighting theme, but fully realized with string and wind sections loftily floating around the composition, while other small percussive or vocal sections poke up from time to time to keep the song feeling majestic and elated. It's also a nice touch that the mysterious sighting music was the first song to greet you when you pop the cartridge in, but it also comes back in a completed form to see you out of the game's conclusion. You figure out how to land a photo, Mew spins playfully as you exit the track, and Professor Oak basically tells you that this is the rarest thing he's ever seen and marks it as your #1 photo. After you've completed your journey, Oak congratulates you, you save your game, and then immediately view the end credits set to the tune of a carefree samba track titled The Rarest Pokemon, while your top few photos zoom out in the background, revealing one after another. The track uses whistles and the Quika, which I only just learned is what we've all been calling the monkey drums, or my favorite description of the instrument, Goron City. I mean, hey, they're not wrong. It also features some brass sections, electric keyboard, and some vocal samples. It's a very fun You Did It track, with lots of hi-hats and snares, and all of this comes together nicely to communicate to the player, wasn't that fun? Let's do this again when you have the time. I didn't go over every track like the Pokemon Signs song, the secondary credits theme, the Pokemon Report theme, but you get the idea. The entire soundtrack is brimming with this nostalgic charm that I can really only pinpoint as cartoonishly goofy through and through. It had cool moments like whenever you'd see a legendary Pokemon or a new evolution, but otherwise it was really adventurous and exciting, and I think the soundtrack contributed to this greatly. The original Pokemon Snap was a cherished game from my childhood that set the future course for my love of mysterious adventure and charming music. And everyone always mentions the Blockbuster Video Snap kiosks that let you print out stickers directly from your cartridge, thus bridging the gap between Pokemon Snap being a stupid kids game versus big corporations acknowledging the massive profit potential in bringing video game stuff to the real world. It scored well with audiences and critics alike, and despite being a clever little one-and-done spin-off, it really resonated with me as something I'd come back and revisit every few years if I was feeling nostalgic. So considering my love for the first game, I naturally wasn't going to be able to look at the new game objectively no matter how hard I tried, but here goes nothing. New Pokemon Snap is exactly what it sounds like. Pokemon Snap's original concept, but executed on far more advanced hardware and with a much expanded Pokedex. 214 compared to the first game's 63 to be precise. You take control of a generic 10-year-old protagonist as you meet the Professor Oak replacement, this guy, Professor Mirror, who my artist has argued is just me, and I hate it. He has the personality of an unsalted cracker and the inoffensive affect of a middle school counselor, and I fucking hate everything about him, especially his name. Mirror? Is that like a lazy lens pun or something? You also meet racially ambiguous tutorial girl, who is purely a blemish on the overall experience as she teaches you how to take pictures, despite the first game doing that by simply pausing the game for a moment until you would press the button displayed on screen, which I thought was a pretty simple solution for a game about taking pictures, but whatever. So the modern version sets aside a dedicated, slow-paced section to do this less effectively, because apparently every video game playing human on the planet is still wrestling with their in-progress craniotomy. I get that I sound like a cranky geezer, but I mean, am I wrong? Like, every individual photo of a Pokemon you take is grouped into a folder, and you can either choose them manually or press the minus button to tell the AI to automatically choose the best one. When you choose the photos, you go into the appraisal section, and you'll notice that there are 4 tiers of photos ranked from 1 to 4 stars in terms of how common that photo is, which I'll get to in a moment. Professor Mirror will go over them and not really comment on anything in particular, simply letting the numbers tally up before complimenting you broadly. It's a logical step to make the photo selection process as streamlined as possible, considering you get significantly more Pokemon and more film with which to photograph them. But I thought it was really fun picking each photo out and saving my favorites, which is actively discouraged, since the auto picker will pick the highest stat photos every time, meaning you have no real reason not to use it if you're trying to play the game as it intends for you to play it, as well as the fact that if you overwrite a higher point photo with a more aesthetically pleasing photo, you are now competing with the high score of the photo you can no longer see or access, thereby screwing you over just a little bit. It's not a massive deal, but it really messes with the flow of the gameplay and makes things needlessly convoluted. But again, I'm probably in the minority on this. You start a normal course, and it's really impressive. The visuals look pretty solid, despite the models likely being the same 3DS models recycled from previous games, and the ability to move your camera around quickly with the inclusion of sensitivity options and motion controls is a huge boon to players who were frustrated by the original game's slow movement, even with the ability to turn 90 degrees quickly using the C buttons. Also, I use very high sensitivity motion controls in my game, so I can have the responsiveness a real photographer would want for high-speed precision shots. And while I can definitely say that it made the game feel much better to control, it also made a lot of the footage more jittery for me personally, especially at the beginning of rounds where I would scratch an itch on my wrist and the footage looked like I was experiencing a 4K stroke. At first, I was really excited when I saw that every course had a night version. That is, until I played them and realized they controlled basically identically with some very minor differences. You'll get some new Pokemon, the music will be half the tempo of the daytime track, there will be alternate events, but otherwise it's the same level. I mean, not that I'm surprised the entire terrain doesn't transform when the sun and moon swap places, but I feel like the nighttime stages are borderline unnecessary. When you include the day, night, and Illumina spot levels, this lets the player say there are 24 levels, which sounds really ambitious and feature-packed compared to the first game having like 7. But in reality, it just ends up feeling like padding with some models and photo ops swapped out. I can say I enjoy the fact that the legendaries in the game occur way later in the game compared to the original, and supposedly you can encounter more at a higher level that I have yet to find mind personally, but I immediately deflated once I realized that the XP bar fills up from getting expedition points gained by taking unique photos of Pokemon, because rather than getting a little bit of XP bit by bit for taking lots of photos of different Pokemon to encourage trial and error, you're basically forced to look up a guide on how to get every 4-star photo, since the hints for certain photo ops can be a bit archaic. And in fact, the game recently received a patch to fix a glitch that prevented players from completing the Braviary Brave Warrior request, LOL, and it's the only way to unlock more progress and Pokemon, especially when figuring out the very specific instructions necessary to set up certain photo conditions. I can sense I might get blowback for this point in particular, since the game doesn't force you to look up a guide and there are enough hints and clues to nudge you in the right direction, but considering I discovered 99% of the content in the original game with even the slightest experimentation and found myself stumped at times with what the sequel wanted me to do in order to unlock the rest of the game, I wish a better balance could have been struck. If I'm being a baby, feel free to let me know, but I was more irked than excited once I realized how this mechanic works. I do think the 4-star system works nicely, since it gives you more variety to find and ultimately more content to unlock, but it once again pushes players to use a power strategy and find out the exact poses or situations in which you need to photograph the Pokemon in question. I do think there's a charming simplicity to tell the player you can only have one photo of each Pokemon, and it better be the best goddamn photo ever, versus, yeah, you can have 4 levels of photo rarity, ranging from sniffing their ass for a 1-star photo to trying to have a productive online political conversation for a 4-star photo. Get it? Because that last one's impossible? Speed differences are quickly made apparent in both games, as the original moved at what felt like 20 to 30 miles per hour, while the new game feels like 10. Both games get a speed boost, but while the original got a boost that would generally reach the end of the course within 1 minute, the new game's boost is one of those is it on types of features. Like, sure, I can tell it's going faster, but it's not very pronounced or dramatic. On top of this, every time you aim your viewfinder at your subject, your vehicle will slow down even more to give you more time to line up your shot. In the original Pokemon Snap, if you missed your shot, you just go back and try again with the handy restart button in the middle of the pause menu. And using your speed boost later on, you could get back to the important part of the course relatively quickly, thereby maintaining the exciting mood. Anyone who played the original can tell you that Staryu was the hardest Pokemon to get a good centered photo of due to the way it spun around you unpredictably, but with the way new Snap works, it's pretty much guaranteed to be a slow-paced, nap-inducing slog compared to the game's origin. It's sort of like saying to someone, hey, do you want to play a level of Dig Dug? Or do you want to play the opening chapter to Assassin's Creed 1? Like, every time I hear this music, I think of the fun little several-minute burst of gameplay I'm going to enjoy. But when I hear this music, I think of the 10-minute tedium I'm going to endure to see if hopefully the next course will be more interesting. Oh, also, I do respect the change to the game formula, which removes the centered photo requirement. It's still valid to take centered photos, but the new game acknowledges modern photography techniques, including the rule of thirds, as well as the ability to take a photo without using the viewfinder, which I genuinely appreciate. There's obviously absolutely nothing wrong with having longer, more content-rich levels like New Snap, and it's the only logical direction to go, since limiting the course length to allow for more arcadey doses of gameplay hopelessly wastes all of the hardware potential of the Switch. It would be like making a brand new Final Fantasy game on the PlayStation 6 and saying, well, people really liked the original, so Final Fantasy 17 is going to be a 2D NES-style game with chiptune music. Like, sure, there would be approximately 5,000 people, including myself, that would unironically kind of like that, but to anyone with a grasp on how industry, competition, and market demand work, they would be screaming at you like you just bought a 3090 GPU to play Lemmings. So yeah, obviously the courses are longer and more densely packed, but at the cost of changing the pace of the game to a snooze-worthy crawl that I felt took away a lot of the enjoyment the game used to have. There are also really small things that bugged me, like the end of the level not giving off the warning sounds to count down the seconds left until the course ends, so you're just left looking at a completely silent symbol that teleports you back to the lab once you touch it from some nondescript distance. Aside from the argument that the alarm sounds might scare young kids, there's really no defense for its removal, except for maybe the idea that it clashes tonally or aesthetically with the high-tech polished motif the game seems to be going for. But let's talk about the main course, the music. So what does it sound like? Well, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, orchestral, comma, to a boring degree. You see, whereas classic Snap was meant to evoke the emotion of a wild, boundless safari, modern Snap aims for a comically laid-back cruise motif that makes it very clear Pokemon have existed in this universe for the past 23 years and are now simply vibing in an open pasture, a cave, or a well-documented section of a beach. I'll be discussing them each briefly, but I apologize if I don't have a ton to say about each individual track, as I don't feel particularly enthusiastic about most of them. If you disagree with my comments and think I'm being too harsh, then I strongly encourage you to leave a comment explaining where I made an oversight, especially since I'm an amateur and I'd like to improve. And I'm not just saying that to tickle the algorithm, I genuinely crave comments other than "I like this video" and and kill yourself. So, with that out of the way, let's begin. The character selection music consists of an upward scaling xylophone with some harp plucks and guitar meant to inspire the player for the supposed world of adventure upon which they have yet to embark, which is fine but very safe. The Lens Research Camp has comforting string overtones with violin and guitar, and what sounds like some accompanying flute. It's clearly meant to instill a sense of tranquility, but it feels saccharine, almost like when you go to a doctor's office with a really relaxing and kid-friendly waiting room to lure you into a sense of security. But in this case, the sense of ease feels slightly manufactured. The tutorial theme, Photograph Lessons, has some cute and invitingly playful pizzicato strings, and a funky, smooth bass line that comes and goes as it pleases. Combined with the consistent triangle notes and reliably laid-back kick and snare drum, all successfully contribute to a friendly, unimposing first impression to the game's photography mechanics. And this is probably my favorite track in the game, seeing as it's really catchy and matches the tone the original game was going for. The photo evaluation theme gives the impression of a pressing, modern 24-hour news cycle, with overtones of progress and enthusiasm, but it plays over both the photo selection and photo appraisal sections, unlike the original game, which, as mentioned earlier, had two tracks, one to calm you down and mentally massage you while you picked out your choices, and another to rev you back up, in the hopes that you'll get a score multiplier. The one we're left with is acceptable but otherwise highly forgettable. The lab theme shoots for a jazzy, quirky sound with quick piano, bits of xylophone, and some sustained strings in the background. Just an overall very playful, unintimidating track. The map select theme sounds adventurous, with some very light xylophone to stir up a sense of excitement, as well as bursts of percussive impact to highlight the string sections. It's fine, but again, it feels pretty generic. Nature Park during the day sports a generic uplifting song with sweeping string and wind sections, but beyond that it plays it very safe since the feeling they want to endow upon the player is wilderness. Nature Park in the evening recycles the exact same motif at half speed with what I think are some added harp sections. The Illumina Meganium track sounds decidedly triumphant and dramatic, with impactful military drums, specifically the timpani, a prominent string section, and minimal piano, but otherwise it's pretty repetitive for a track that's supposed to amp you up for the first boss fight in the game. Much like the original game's final level, this game decided that the best way to handle boss sections was to solve an easy puzzle, which would allow you to properly secure a photo, but it's unfortunate that the boss music sounds so underwhelming across the board. Found Jungle during the day has plenty of tribal elements, sporting lots of percussion with some string stings. It hits an overall jubilant and wild overtone reminiscent of Monster Hunter bass music. Jungle at Night has chimes added, but otherwise it's the same song and also still sounds like Monster Hunter music. Elsewhere Forest utilizes cello, piano, guitar, and violin to achieve a whimsical yet sad track, almost like a Ghibli movie. Melodic's Illumina theme uses gentle, reversed reverb piano to denote delicate glass, as well as tribal-sounding drums and a basic string section, which I believe is the established Illumina leitmotif. Blushing Beach during the day has a steel drum and marimba elements, including a guitar being aggressively tickled. Blushing Beach in the evening is half pace per usual with an added saxophone and harp. Maricopa Reef during the day sports piano, guitar, some bustling percussion, and a rising melody leading to a melodically repetitive chorus with some subtle triangle. Maricopa Reef in the evening is the same as the day theme, but with a saxophone instead of guitar. The Lentil Seafloor uses guitar, harp, and some light cymbals, but is otherwise generically devoid of much whimsy. Wishy-Washy's Illumina theme has gentle piano with minimal percussion, as well as some harp with a descending melody. Sweltering Sands during the day sounds like a Middle Eastern tone with string stabs, some sitar for melodic accent, and some sustained horns for the lead. It sure does sound sandy. Sweltering Sands in the evening sounds the same as the daytime theme, but slower. What a surprise. Fireflow Volcano utilizes xylophone percussion with triumphant string sections, and manages to sound pretty dramatic despite lacking a main melody of any kind. I will give credit to the drums, which sound like deep pounding bass, almost like you can hear the Tyrantrum coming to get you. Corona's Illumina theme sports intense boss fight vibes with a female choir introduction, as well as some piccolo and string sections, utilizing some suspenseful wind sections later in the track. Shiver Snowfields during the day uses lots of percussion, some jingle bells, guitar, drums, and otherwise establishes a relaxing tone to make us reflect upon the quiet tranquility and ironic warmth of a winter scene. Shiver Snowfields in the evening is mainly strings and guitar, with some melodic trills for accent. Outway Cave sounds melancholic, featuring lonely strings with a synthesizer in the background and some mild wind instrumentation. Later in the song, we hear an isolated piano section, which makes for a contemplative-sounding track. Steelix's Illumina theme uses military drums, subtle piano and strings, a muted horn like a villain's theme from a kid's cartoon, lots of sustained notes to establish tension, and it builds into a crescendo despite not going anywhere clear with its melody and opting to just loop back to the intro. By all rights, this should have been one of the most intense songs in the game, and they managed to make it sound boring. Ruins of Remembrance track utilizes sagely bells and low-pitched plucked strings, as well as some sustained strings with some harp peppered in for a purportedly sagacious tone that ends up making me just want to take a nap. Xerneas' Illumina theme has quick violin notes with gentle piano, triangle hits, brass, rising percussion, and sounds vaguely hopeful despite never building up to anything. And lastly, the staff roll theme weaponizes a sentimental violin or harp, but is otherwise a reincorporation of the main theme with some extra string sections before fading into some nighttime variant music and other songs I don't care to listen to. To be honest, I completely checked out around Steelix's theme, and your guess is as good as mine as to whether this is a lovingly scored soundtrack or an uninspired, half-hearted, royalty-free album so the defenders can say, yeah, but look at how many tracks it has. And now for personality, I'll show you one more track that was cut from the original N64 game called Fantastic Horror, which starts off with ominous bells before transitioning into a slow waltz with an organ for the supporting melody, guitar for tempo and bass guitar for harmony, tambourine for rhythm, and a wind instrument playfully dancing up and down the composition before a whistle jumps in for the second half of the chorus. Then transition to the lonely B section using all of the instruments together as the song builds to a gothic-sounding crescendo before looping back to the bells. And okay, I lied, there's one more song. The unused horror boss, most likely for a Gengar, seeing as that was like the only intimidating ghost type in the entire game, has a great track with staccato piano, a lonely prolonged whistle, some descending wind instruments that also lend a sense of insanity to the track, and some hi-hats or tambourine for the satisfyingly danceable percussion. Although to be honest, this song sounds really familiar. Overall, New Pokemon Snap is an inoffensive, average game, but it doesn't go beyond that. I was personally let down by the total lack of charm and any sense of adventure, and was instead given what feels like a metaphorical on-rails zoo, rather than a brazen and exciting safari. That's not to say Pokemon Snap can't work in a more sterile, tourist-friendly setting, but for me personally, that's not what I liked about the first game. It's too plain, too shiny, too previously explored for me to get the same sense of grandiose, wild adventure, despite being bigger and more ambitious in literally every way. It just felt like the Pokemon Company said, make it, so they'll stop asking. And we're just left with yet another unpolished, unremarkable entry in the growing catalog of mediocre Nintendo cash grabs. If I'm being nostalgic, then it sure doesn't feel like it. But hopefully one day Nintendo will beef up their hardware and their first-party developers can really go ham with a Pokemon game that actually blows the previous game out of the water. But somehow I'm not feeling optimistic.